Yeah. Okay. So here's my question. Insofar as, you're talking about ultimately it really is just a war of ideas. There's not necessarily an objective right or wrong, but I believe in values. I, Richard, believe in values, and I want to push for my values. Would it be fair to say that largely you're banking on Christians, even if you might have certain moral disagreements with them on certain things? Would it be fair to say that you're banking on Christians to ultimately help and assist in pushing what you believe is right on the world?
100%.
So I guess you're not saying you definitely affirm that there is a metaphysical category called a moral realm. Is that true?
I think that there is, but I think it comes from us.
So how would it be that from us we could somehow create something metaphysical, especially if we didn't always exist?
Well, okay, that's a good question. How about this? The very first time on earth that people began to sing a song and they remembered the notes and actually have lyrics. So for the first time there's a song, there's no music, maybe a sticks, as a sort of a rhythm. And then they start singing, now there's lyrics. Now that song exists. I would call that a metaphysical realm. Is that not the right way to say it?
I don't know, and maybe I should look up the definition of metaphysical. I'm meaning like an objective ontological category, like say like mathematics. Like
Right.
that's not
Okay.
something like we couldn't just invent our own version of mathematics and somehow create an actual metaphysical realm of new mathematics.
Okay, so we might have to come up with another word because I like to use calculus sometimes also because calculus always existed, and it took us a long time to figure it out. Only in the past few hundred years have we figured out that calculus was a real thing, and very smart people tried for thousands of years. There's some way to measure this very complex stuff, and they took a long time, but only the past few hundred years have we come up with calculus. I would
we can come up with our own formulas. Sorry to cut you off there, but like we can come up with our own formulas of how to describe things, but fundamentally we're discovering the realm of mathematics. We're not creating it or inventing it.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. But now the song, the very first song that the first people sang, they did create that.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, that song and calculus are the same thing. But I see what you mean, that calculus is still just part of calculus existed before us. Because
it was a part of reality, regardless of our preferences about it.
Right, or even even how we felt about it. It's just the case that if a planet is moving, or a galaxy is moving, and there's all these twisted measurements, there's a way to measure that. And even though there was no people to measure it, there was still a way to measure it. Okay, so then I would have to think of some other kind of word, but it's something that exists, like a song exists, even though I can't pull it out of the air. It's something that really does exist. So I think primates had some form of morality. I think they still do. I think ants have some form of morality, still do. But our form of morality is much different because we have a lot of different cultural songs kind of waiting for us. And you come up in life and you're sort of expected to live one, but you usually veer and change it a little bit. And then maybe when you're 20, you might embrace another one, or you might create one. Joseph Smith created one. And now 200 years later, now 20 million people embrace it. So I always say that. Go ahead.
No, I have some pushback to this. I do want to allow CJ, and I know we said we're going to mute him, but he just wants to make a brief point if that's okay.
Okay.
I just want to double back since you guys were discussing just purely for the sake of keeping the argument on the same terms and definitions when you guys had spoken on the actual definition of metaphysics before you continue, just to keep everything intellectually honest. Merriam-Webster defines metaphysics as a division of philosophy that is concerned with the fundamental nature of reality and being that often includes ontology, cosmology, and often epistemology.
Okay.
Just wanted to interject that just for the sake of making it easier for you guys while the terms and definitions are there.
I appreciate it.
And just for the purposes of this discussion, I think of things, and we can come up with another word. I don't know what word we use, but I think of things that we can create still existing, and we can pass those down. We can pass those down across generations. It's like Christianity is like that. You have these very original batch of Christians in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, and it kind of hovered above them. And then I would say a different group spread that. I could argue this. A different group spread that out across the Roman Empire, and then future generations came, and now that Christian cloud is kind of orbiting around the whole world. Not really physically, but might as well be,
Right.
because somebody in China, somebody in South Africa, and somebody in Alaska at opposite ends of the earth could be thinking about the same thing.
Yeah. I guess where I went off for the pushback is kind of in his definition of metaphysics when he's talking about studying the actual nature of reality. It's like that's what I want to know is the moral realm an actual fundamental part of ontological reality? Because this is where I think some of the equivocation comes in sometimes is when you're talking about morality in terms of, well, it's a system we create or a song we create. It's like, yeah, but that's no different than this country prefers this system of government. That's their cultural norm and the way that their people understand the moral workings within that cultural norm versus this other country creates a different system of government. Ultimately, it's relative. You can't say that if there's not an ontological moral realm or if God doesn't exist, that therefore one is objectively better than the other. So I guess more so what I'm trying to ask is not how is it that we can create systems of cultural norms that we might within that system because the way we're raised and the way we're raised to maybe even recoil at certain things. But beyond that, can we correlate that to anything ontological that says, well, my reaction to this thing is correct, whereas someone's reaction to it is incorrect?
Yeah, now I know exactly what you mean. And here's my answer. And this is a brutal answer. In my worldview, the Nazis or ISIS could win. They could take over the whole world. And some of the best people in the world, people that you and I admire, could die out. And it could be that all of our descendants then fall under Nazism or ISIS and continue on for 1,000 years, and where no one ever even thinks Christianity could go so far away that no one in the future ever considers it. Now, Christianity can still be true. So Christianity is true, but 2,000 years from now, if we could leave Earth and come back in 2000 and interview everybody, nobody would know what the heck we were talking about. Now, it has nothing to do with the ontological case. Let's say Christianity is ontologically true. And I mentioned this in my that first video that I hope you can link to, because I want people to go and listen to my fifth point there. We're in a battle of cultural songs. So cultural, you and I probably aren't too different on a lot of what we think people ought to do and ought not to do. There's some things that we would argue about, some things we might differ on a lot. But for the most part, the way we take care of our families and the way we interact with our communities are very similar. And I'm like, there's different groups out there. And again, I've been working in counterterrorism for 31 years. There are different groups out there who want a much different reality. And we're in a battle. They're trying to get momentum and we're trying to get momentum. And in my mind, there's no judge. There's no judge watching this going, you know what, these guys are actually right and these guys are actually wrong. There's nothing's going to intervene. It's going to really come down to our momentum.
Well, right. So that,
momentum.
Yeah, just to interject, that's what I'm trying to drill down on, because I think if you say, well, Christianity could be true, well, that's not necessarily answering the question, because of course, if Christianity is true, then we can just say that even if the Nazis win World War II, they're still wrong. And then if we all follow those beliefs, we're still objectively wrong. Whereas what I want to get from you, which I think you just clarified, is that from your view, there really is no judge. So it really is. I mean, when we get back to, we might react differently to certain preferences. I might recoil because my preference is that Nazism doesn't win out. I might recoil at the hypothetical, but it doesn't. If there is no judge, if there is nobody saying it's actually right or wrong, then that really is just a preference of mine. We can't actually say they're objectively wrong.
And I would quibble over the word preference only because of how we react to it. Because people would be like, no, it's real. But here's the thing, we're perceiving that these things are real. You and I perceive that these moral issues are real. And I'm saying that it might not be based on something actually outside of us. It could just be an intergenerated certainty. I don't like to say hallucination or delusion because it makes it sound like people are weak-minded. But a lot of what we perceive really is intergenerated imagery rather than exactly what's out there. So I think that's probably what's going on. And I always say, if there is a judge, if that judge is watching this, he's never going to get involved. So if Christianity is true, and if God is actually the author of what's right and wrong, he is not. I know Scripture says he is, but I'm like, you should live every day as if he is never going to step in and the momentum of your cultural song is going to come down to the work that you put in. And if it is ontologically the case, I'm just saying, okay, if it is great, he's never going to intervene. And it's going to come down to who's here or not.
Well, I mean, if you believe in the end times, yes, but even then, I don't think that's a dichotomy between you either have to let God intervene or I have to do something. If part of my Christian worldview is that I am called to do something about it, like that, that is the means by which God often changes is through us. So I don't think that those are actually separate ideas of God intervening versus me doing something. I think often the way God intervenes is through his commands that I do something or that you do something.
Yeah, if you're doing something through God and that's how he intervenes, great. You know, it's like when I was in the Marines, if I've got 20 people working for me and I'm like, we're going to take this hill. And, you know, 10 of them are like, well, I'm going to take the hill because God is having me do it. And then the other 10 are like, well, we're just going to take the hill. I'm like, all 20 of you follow me. I don't care what you tell yourself. We're taking this hill. That's how I'm approaching this. If you're intervening because God's telling you, hey, maybe God is telling you, but I'm saying, hey, we're in this battle. We're going this way. We're going to do this. Not that I necessarily have to be in the lead, but this is something we're either going to do or we're not. And it's going to come down to existence. And that's why I say in one of these videos, I say the real foundation is whether or not you exist or not. Again, it has nothing to do with whether you're true. It could be false. You know, the false worldview, let's say there is an ontologically true worldview. An ontologically false worldview can still dominate the planet. And I'm saying that's what we have to try to avoid. Whether it's true or false, it's going to come down to momentum.
Do we have an objective ought to not follow it?
I think so, but again, remember,
okay, good. So that's a good transition because this is where I kind of want to press you next.
Okay.
And by the way, just real quick, the reason I was using the word preference was not to be like emotionally loaded or insulting, but because I actually do think it brings clarity, right? It can, the atheists I understand could interpret it as insulting, as me calling their moral beliefs preferences, but I think it brings clarity over the ambiguity of, well, it's more than a preference. In other words, say, are you talking about an actual ontological category? Or if it's not, then it really is preferences, even if those preferences seem so much stronger to us. But, okay, so from your view, you do think there is an ought. Here's kind of my question is, if there is no, let's say, authority outside of humanity, who defines what's right and wrong?
Well, I think we do. And not only do we do it, our collective action is what keeps it going. And if we stop doing it, then that ought goes away. It fades away, just like the songbird song fades away. And then it's gone. It could have been true.
Well, who is we?
People. I think people create this ought about what we ought and ought not to do. Now, there's different oughts. You know, there's terrorists who say we ought to do something that you and I would find atrocious. They've created their ought. You and I have, well, we've embraced. We can't say we've created it. We're not the first people in 300,000 years of human existence. You and I aren't the first people who say we can't slaughter, an innocent village. But there have been times in human history where people have said we ought to do that, and they feel like they ought to do it, and they perceive it as an ontological mandate to wipe out a village. And I'm like, hey, reality is heartless. If we go and we wipe out that village, they're gone. And if somebody comes and wipes out our village, we're gone. And reality does not care. Now we're perceiving ontological mandates over preferences as we're doing it, and that's wonderful. But reality is like, I don't care what you call it, you're not here anymore, or you are here. That's the real. If I'm right, that's the real foundation, is whether or not you're still here.
Well, then that's what I was going to ask you, right? Because it's like, so you say we define it, and then who's we? Well, it's people. Okay, so if exactly half of humanity agrees with your moral view, and then the other exact half of humanity agrees with the moral view of the people who you fight against, then the question is, who determines who's right? You would say it's not a who determines that's right. It's literally just who's remaining.
It's a war, just like that song that you play on your at the beginning, the intro for your song. At that point, it's war. And hey, that's my fifth point. My fifth point is we are in a battle of cultural songs, and it's going to be a battle for existence. And there's some great moral systems out there that I'm really inspired by. But if people stop endorsing them and embracing them, then they're gone. And if people embrace and endorse moral systems that I find repulsive or sad, and they dominate and take over, then they win. And reality does not care. We can all disappear. Reality is like, hey, what can I tell you? There used to be some people. Now there's not any people.
But again, and so again, if we define it, the majority defines it, and then who wins defines it. Suppose the
Mhm.
people who are the kind of people that you fight against in your line of work, right? They
Yeah.
win.
Yep.
Right. And then say they dominate the world, that's their moral belief. And then let's say
Yeah.
you somehow were born into that world, and somehow, for whatever reason, you as an isolated individual come up with the moral views that you currently have.
Right.
Do you think you have a moral objective to fight against them, or to just fall in line with them?
I would. If I'm somehow, miraculously, I'm born into that world now, and I think like I do, and I'm like, hey, this is wrong. I think Jesus actually, historically, I think Jesus was actually born into a situation exactly like that. And he was like, hey, this is all wrong. The Romans are doing this wrong. The Jewish authorities are doing this wrong. The Jewish people are doing this wrong. I don't like the way they're talking about Samaritans. I'm gonna knock some sense into these people. And he convinced about 3,000 people, maybe more, to see things his way. So I think that actually happens in history, and it's a battle of moral systems. So Jesus had this way of seeing things. He was surrounded by people who are like, "You dumbass," and he was like, "No, I'm gonna keep going, bro." And he did. And even after, I think he died, and I think he stayed going. But even with that momentum that he built kept going, and to this day, it's still a thing that's still hovering over us. So yeah, I would try to do it as best as I could. Maybe I'd get killed the next day. Maybe I'd convince 3 people, and they convince 1,000 people, and maybe that moral system would have a chance. But it's either going to exist or it's not. And then I'm like, hey, everybody, you have your beliefs, right? Are you either going to put your whole life into these moral beliefs, or are you just going to be like, well, I just kind of hope? And if you're the kind of person who puts your whole life into it, and you have people working with you, then that moral song is more likely to endure, which is exactly what happened with Jesus. At some point, he could have been like, nah, man, forget it. And then we would not be talking about Christianity, but he didn't. He was like, no, I'm going to keep going. So I think the effort that we put in has everything to do with whether the moral system exists. And then when it doesn't exist, it's because not enough people embraced it and endorsed it.
Yeah. Sorry. Could you hear that? No, you shouldn't be. Okay. So yeah. Well, so then here's my question though. If you believe in that situation, because right, we got through it. Who defines what's right and wrong? We do. Okay. From who's we? Humanity. Okay.
Yep.
But then if humanity disagrees, what's going to come down to is who wins. That defines right and wrong. But now you're saying, well, but if you as an individual, if you had an ought to fight against it based on what you believed, how do you avoid the conclusion from that from your worldview that you, Richard Suttles, are the moral authority?
Well, this is why I say morality is different than preferences, because when people perceive morality, they're like, I don't care, I'm going to do it. So morality is all about action. And these moral systems are all about action. You either do the things that you do to keep the moral system in place, or you don't. And if you don't do it, it goes away. And if you do it, then it has a chance. So morality
not necessarily. I mean, as ridiculous as this hypothetical might sound, you can imagine a scenario where someone has a preference for chocolate ice cream, and so they somehow want to influence through law that chocolate ice cream is the dominant flavor, and it's purely just because they want to see more of it in stores because they want to hoard it. Like, it might be a silly thing, but that doesn't make it any more than a preference just because they're trying to do something about it.
Well, I agree that happens too. There's all kinds of people who say, hey, I want this preference. I want things to be more like this. Organizations, companies, corporations, they do that all the time. They're like, hey, when people talk about headaches, I don't want them to talk about Bayer. I want them to talk about Tylenol. And they literally force that to happen with money and institutions. So that does happen too. It's not like morality is the only way that we can make our cloud of information more dominant than the others. Same exact thing for language. If someone creates a new language tomorrow that's never existed, but other people like it, and then more people speak it, and then more people, and then 1,000 years later, 7 billion people speak it, it won. It just dominated. And I'm saying morality is exactly like that. Our moral frameworks are exactly like language. We push it until it no longer exists.
But it's just your preference to push your view, right?
The thing is, if people say, hey, it's just a preference, again, just like Jesus is talking about the Good Samaritan, and people are like, oh, he's saying his preference is to also be nice to the Samaritans. He would be like, okay, say the word preference if you want, but no, I actually mean this. I actually think we should treat Samaritans as equal to us. And if they behave
I'm talking about what it is, not what you mean by it or how strongly you feel in favor of it. I'm talking about what it is.
I get that. We're thinking, what's the actual ontological truth of what we're saying? And what I'm saying is that that's going to be overwhelmed by what we do. so that you can be ontologically correct, but if I outcompete you
Okay, so-
and what you're saying goes away, then I win, even if I'm wrong.
But so what you're doing in the situation again, where you're the only individual who believes like you do, what you're doing is fighting to push it, and then you want ideally to win and have everybody adopt it. How is it not the case that in that world, you, Richard Suttles, are the moral authority defining what's right and wrong?
Well, I might not be, but I'm going to act as if I am. I'm gonna act like, no, I've got this figured out and I'm going to make this work. And then if I actually get it done, it'll be amazing. But at some point, if I really mean it and someone goes, hey, shut your mouth and I'm going to kill you, then I've got to decide right then, do I really mean it? And then I might say, no, I can't. I'm the kind of person that I can't stop, and then they kill me. Some people are like that. Some people are like, hey, some people say, hey, look, I don't want to fight this anymore. I just want to get by. And some people say, nah, man, I'm all in. I'm going to keep doing this. It's going to come down to what you do. So
I agree. So
I'm going to think that I have an ontological moral obligation from upon high to do it right. But I'm saying that could just be my hallucination.
But it's coming from you ultimately, because I know you'll do this thing where you'll say, well, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there's a moral judge, right? But that's kind of like a way of backing out of like the implication of the question, right? Because the question is, from your view, there is no judge, right? You don't believe that judge exists. So
Right,
yeah, we can both have the maybe I'm wrong discussion, but the question is, from your view, because you don't believe the moral judge exists, at the end of the day, it's coming from you, whether you believe that there's more to it or not.
Right. And this is what I meant by taking the hill. When I was in the Marines and I had to take a hill, and in Iraq, it was more like a building rather than a hill. But if I was in Iraq and I had to take a building, I took the building. And, I had people under me that helped me take it. But I'm either going to take that building or I'm not. And I could believe that I have a moral authority. I could believe that I'm wrong. The reality is going to come down to whether I take the building or not. And every moral system is going to come down to whether you still exist or not. And you can take it implications. You can say implications all you want, but it's either going to exist or it's not.
Yeah. Well, and the reason I kind of wanted to press, and I appreciate you being straightforward and honest about that, right? Because again, maybe I'm wrong discussions aside, right? When I watch a lot of these moral debates is, the atheist is always wanting to object to the Christian, the Bible's immoral or your God is immoral, this and that.
Right.
It's like, well, when you really press them to define it, the only authority they're appealing to say that is them. They'll try to play like maybe they can appeal to something else. And it's like, you're really just saying you as the immoral authority are judging the Bible as wrong. And I think, well, I'm fine. I disagree with you because then I just disagree.
Right. I completely agree. I agree with you on this because I argue with this with atheists too. I'm like, especially the atheists will say something's evil and then they'll say morality is just relative. And I'm like, okay, then why is that evil? And I get very few atheists who say, look, I don't like this, and I'm going to push for this to be considered evil. Just admit it, because I'm like that. There's verses in the Bible that I'm like, nope, I don't like the way this sounds. I don't want that ever to be preached as a good thing. And heck, I've got a lot of Christians who agree with me, who say, look, I can't explain why those verses are in the Bible like that. And if they are, they're not meant to be taken that way. And you're right, it's me versus people who say, no, this is wonderful. And admittedly, there's very few Christians who are like, yeah, I'm so glad these kids got hurt. We have different reasons as to why those verses are there. But I think it's a battle. I think it's a war, me versus them. And then someone can say, well, that's just you. And I'll say, okay, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Okay. So, but good.
Atheists don't want to say it's not down to me. It really is something up there. And then I'm like, okay, if you think there's something up there, then you're kind of agreeing with them that there's something up there.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate that because again, even if we define it as a battle, there still is a further question of, well, is there a right winner and a wrong winner? And it sounds like if you're saying, well, it's just who wins, there's not a metaphysical objective way we can say there is a right winner or a wrong winner. Now, real quickly, I want to give you the chance to cross-examine me, and I just realized how long we've been going, but I just have real quick, hopefully these will be quicker, 2 more points I want to make. So I'm going to share my screen and bring this up real quick just so people can see. Playlist by, should be coming up. Yeah, here's a playlist by Inspiring Philosophy, Mike Jones, and it's Christianity in the West, how Christianity changed the world, how Christianity ended slavery, how Christianity saved children. And we kind of discussed this over text. And I think who would agree grant this largely, correct?
Yeah, I would. A few years ago when Dominion came out, and then J. Warner Wallace's book, Person of Interest, I forget how much sooner or later J. Warner Wallace's book, Person of Interest, came out when Dominion came out. But for some reason, I read them both together in the same year. I think one of my apologist friends had me, might have been Josh Rasmussen, had me read them both together. And I agreed with that. There's a lot of values that a lot of other cultures didn't have, and the Christians did, and those it's like I was saying, there's this battle of cultural values, and those values won out. So that today there's a whole bunch of people who use those values that 2,000 years ago, like we were just talking about the Odyssey. During the time of the Odyssey, these values were not in place, and now they are.
Yeah. Okay. So here's my question. Insofar as you're talking about, ultimately, it really is just a war of ideas. There's not necessarily an objective right or wrong, but I believe in values. I, Richard, believe in values, and I want to push for my values. Would it be fair to say that largely you're banking on Christians, even if you might have certain moral disagreements with them on certain things? Would it be fair to say that you're banking on Christians to ultimately help and assist in pushing what you believe is right on the world?
100%. In fact, I always say Little House on the Prairie, which was one of my favorite shows when I was growing up. I always say you should try to be, especially when I'm talking to guys, because a lot of lost guys out there. I always say, try to be as much as Charles Ingalls as you can be. And people are like, you realize he was a Christian, right? And I'm like, oh yeah. And then I'm like, not only that, try to live in a community as much like Walnut Grove. Try to make it as Walnut Grove as you possibly can, which are, Christian ideals. But again, I'm okay with that. So yeah, 100%. A lot of my friends are Christians. Here in Arizona, most of our friends are Mormons because we live in Mormon territory. So I actually interact with Mormons more than I do, day to day here in Arizona, more than I do with traditional Christians. But same thing, they're very Walnut Grove, Charles Ingalls type people. And I think that's the way to be. And if it takes Christianity, wonderful. At the same time, if it takes Mormons, they'll be it too. I actually think Mormons have a better network if things start to really fall apart. Even though Mormons are only like 20 million strong, I think they actually have a better network. I think they can hold tight better than, like, say, evangelism. It's all down to your networks.
Yeah, there's certain cultural things. There's certain cultural things involved in that I might not even necessarily consider moral, and that we have to have a discussion about that. But no, I do appreciate that concession because, again, in a lot of debates you see, it's always, the Bible's so immoral. We don't want Christians in government and this and that. And they'll quibble over like minor things like gay marriage or something that's not so minor like abortion. And I get where the disagreement comes there. But if we're looking at the big picture, right, things like the fact that slavery was ended, that children were viewed as, you can't just abuse them. Mike Jones gets way into that, how children were not seen as even human and were terribly abused in the ancient world. If we're talking, and the fact that even people, again, J. Warner Wallace or Tom Holland will talk about this, that even the way we view things like forgiveness, we take for granted that, of course, forgiveness is good, but that wasn't even seen as a virtue for most of history through most societies. And so I appreciate that you'll say it, because a lot of these other people will pretend like Christianity is only harmful. And it's like, actually, no, probably a lot of the views of what you think is the good, you actually kind of needed the Christians to build the West for you to even have those views. And if you give the power to non-Christians, I mean, we see where that happens, certainly in Islamic countries, and then even to degrees where the West has become secularized. We see declining birth rates and things like that. I don't think people actually realize the full repercussions if Christians aren't the ones pushing their values and dominating there.
When I wait, you 24, both my ankles hit the floor. Take a break, say thank you, Lord. Then I dip up out the door. Don't laugh it, I can't afford. Built tough like a Ford. Pack the word like a sword. This a battle, this a war for your mind. It's a war for your time.